Montana Territory, 1873. A soft lavender twilight settled over the rugged landscapes of the Bitterroot Valley, casting long shadows across the weathered sign of the Aspen Creek Ranch. 22-year-old Pearl Anderson stood on the porch of the modest ranch house, her honey-blonde hair pulled back in a practical braid, wisps escaping to frame her delicate face. She wore a simple blue calico dress that had seen better days, patched in places but clean and neat. Her green eyes narrowed as she watched dust clouds rising in the distance, signaling approaching riders. "They are coming back, Pa," she called inside, her voice tight with worry. The ranch had been her home for all her life, a place built by her father's hands and her mother's dreams. But now, with her father bedridden from a fall that had shattered his hip 3 months prior, and her mother 5 years in the grave, Pearl carried the weight of the Aspen Creek on her slender shoulders alone. "How many?" her father's voice called weakly from inside. "5, maybe 6, Pearl replied, her hand instinctively moving to the Winchester rifle leaning against the porch post. "The Wilson boys again, I reckon." The Wilson cattle operation had been pressuring smaller ranchers to sell out across the valley, and the Aspen Creek Ranch, with its reliable water source and prime grazing land, was a particular prize they coveted. With just Pearl and her injured father, they believed the Andersons would be easy to intimidate. What they had not counted on was Pearl's fierce determination. "The frontier takes or you take from it," her father had taught her. "There is no middle ground, no room for softness." It was a lesson Pearl had taken to heart, believing that attachment only led to heartbreak in a land where death and loss were constant companions. Her mother's passing had only reinforced this belief. Loving deeply meant suffering deeply when the harsh realities of frontier life inevitably took their toll. What Pearl wanted was simple: to keep her family's land, to ensure her father's remaining years were comfortable, to prove that a woman could stand firm against the relentless challenges of the Montana frontier. What she needed, though she would never admit it, was someone to share the burden, someone to remind her that strength didn't have to mean solitude. As the riders drew closer, Pearl's grip tightened on her rifle. She had heard rumors of a new hand the Wilsons had hired, some gunslinger from Wyoming with a reputation for dealing harshly with homesteaders who refused to sell. She squared her shoulders, preparing for yet another confrontation. But as the riders came into clear view, Pearl realized this wasn't the Wilson contingent at all. These men wore the dust of the trail, not the polished look of the Wilson ranch hands. At their lead rode a young man whose straight posture and confident handling of his dappled gray stallion immediately caught her attention. "Hello, the house," he called, raising his hand in a peaceful gesture. "Permission to approach." Pearl kept her rifle visible but lowered. "State your business," she called back, her voice carrying the authority of someone twice her age. The young man reined his horse to a stop at a respectful distance. "Name's Wyatt Sutton," he called. "These are my men, we're looking for work, heard the double bar might be hiring." Pearl studied him carefully. Wyatt Sutton appeared to be in his mid-20s, with sandy brown hair and clear blue eyes that met her gaze directly. His face was tanned but clean-shaven, with a strong jaw that suggested stubbornness. Unlike many drifters, he and his men had an orderly look about them, tired but disciplined. "Double Bar is 20 miles north," she replied. "You are on Aspen Creek land." Something in her tone must have revealed her strain, because Wyatt Sutton's expression shifted from polite inquiry to concern. "Begging your pardon, miss, but is everything all right here?" "We passed some rough-looking fellows on the road who seemed mighty interested in this direction." Pearl hesitated. Frontier wisdom said never to reveal weakness to strangers, but frontier necessity sometimes required taking chances. "That would be the Wilson outfit," she said finally. "They have been making themselves unwelcome around here lately." Wyatt Sutton exchanged glances with his men before dismounting smoothly. "Mind if we water our horses before moving on?" "Been a long ride." It was a simple request, but in it Pearl sensed an offer. These men would stay long enough to discourage any trouble from the Wilson crew should they arrive. It was the first kindness offered to Aspen Creek in months, and it contradicted everything Pearl believed about frontier self-reliance. "The creek's around back," she said, gesturing with her rifle. "Help yourselves." As the men led their horses around, Wyatt approached the porch, removing his hat to reveal hair that the sun had lightened in streaks. Up close, Pearl could see the laugh lines around his eyes, surprising in a young man who lived the hard life of a cowhand. "Thank you kindly, miss." "Anderson, Pearl Anderson." "Miss Anderson," he nodded respectfully. "Your father around?" The question wasn't invasive but practical. On the frontier, one always addressed the head of the household. Still, Pearl felt her defenses rise. He's indisposed. I speak for Aspen Creek now. Instead of the dismissal or condescension she expected, Wyatt simply nodded. Then I'll speak plainly to you. My men and I just finished a cattle drive from Wyoming. We were heading to the double bar, but I recognize trouble when I see it brewing. If you're short-handed and could use some help around here, even temporarily, we'd work for fair wages. Pearl almost refused outright. Strangers couldn't be trusted, especially handsome ones with offers that seemed too convenient. But before she could respond, a shot rang out in the distance, followed by her foreman's frantic shouting as he galloped toward the house from the eastern pasture. Miss Pearl. The Wilsons are running off the north herd. In that moment, Pearl's dilemma crystallized. Accept help from strangers or lose the cattle that represented their only chance of making it through the coming winter. Wyatt Sutton was already moving, signaling his men without waiting for Pearl's response. Which way? He asked the foreman. North Ridge, beyond the aspen grove, the breathless man replied. Wyatt turned to Pearl, his expression now all business. Your call, Miss Anderson. We can help, but only with your say-so. Everything in Pearl's frontier-trained instincts told her to handle this alone, to trust no one but herself and her people. But the practical reality was stark. Her foreman and 2 hands against the Wilson crew was a losing proposition. Go, she said, making a decision that would alter the course of her life. But I'm coming too. Within minutes, Pearl had changed into riding clothes, checked on her father, and mounted her paint mare. As she rode alongside Wyatt Sutton toward the north pasture, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just opened a door she had long kept firmly shut, the door to relying on someone else, to admitting she couldn't do everything alone. Might I ask what a crew of your size is doing passing through? She asked as they galloped, the practical question masking her unease. Delivered 2,000 head to the railroad at Helena, he replied. Owner paid us off there instead of back in Wyoming. Some of the boys are heading home, but the rest of us were looking for winter work. Pearl nodded, processing this information. Cattle drivers were a common sight in Montana, but something about Wyatt Sutton suggested he was more than just another hired hand. The way he carried himself, how quickly his men had responded to his silent commands, he had leadership qualities that went beyond his years. They crested a hill, and the scene below confirmed Pearl's fears. Half a dozen Wilson men were herding 30 or more Aspen Creek cattle toward the property line, while 2 others were engaged in a standoff with her remaining ranch hand. Wyatt assessed the situation quickly. Your brand? He asked. Connected AP right shoulder, Pearl replied. My men and I will circle around and cut off their escape route. If you and your foreman can create a distraction from this side, we can push them into the Box Canyon to the west. The strategy was sound, and Pearl found herself nodding in agreement. There's a stream that runs along the western edge. They won't be able to cross easily there. Wyatt signaled his men, who immediately split off to flank the rustlers. Pearl watched, impressed despite herself, as they moved with the coordinated precision of men who had worked together for years. You ready for this? Wyatt asked her, his blue eyes serious. These men won't take kindly to being interrupted. Pearl checked her rifle. This is not my first encounter with the Wilson crew, Mr. Sutton. I doubt it will be my last. He studied her for a moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. I believe that, Miss Anderson. There was respect in his voice and something else Pearl couldn't quite identify. On your signal, then. What followed was a chaotic but effective operation. Pearl and her foreman created enough commotion to distract the Wilson men, while Wyatt and his crew expertly maneuvered the stolen cattle back toward Aspen Creek land. The Wilson hands, finding themselves outflanked and outmaneuvered, eventually retreated, but not before their leader, a burly man with a scarred face, shouted threats that made Pearl's blood run cold. This isn't over, Anderson. Wilson wants this land, and what Wilson wants, Wilson gets. By sunset, the cattle were safely returned to Aspen Creek pastures. Pearl's small crew and Wyatt's men gathered in the yard outside the ranch house, the atmosphere one of cautious victory. They will be back, Pearl said matter-of-factly, addressing both groups, probably with more men next time. Wyatt, his shirt now dust-covered and sweat-stained from the day's work, nodded in agreement. You're right about that. The way they were talking, they've got their sights set on more than just your cattle. Pearl's foreman, an older man named Thomas who had worked for her father for decades, spoke up. Miss Pearl, with your father laid up and just the three of us left, we can't keep fighting them off. The truth of his words stung, but Pearl refused to show it. We have managed so far. Barely, Thomas countered gently. And they're getting bolder. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group until Wyatt cleared his throat. Miss Anderson, my offer still stands. My men and I need work for the winter, and you need hands. Seems Providence might have put us in your path at the right time. Pearl looked at the 6 men before her, strangers who had just helped save her cattle without any guarantee of payment or employment. It went against everything she believed about surviving on the frontier, but the practical reality was undeniable. I cannot pay what the double bar might offer, she said finally. We are just getting by. Wyatt shrugged. Room, board, and fair wages for fair work is all we ask. My men are loyal and hardworking, you saw that today. Pearl made her decision, though a voice in her head warned her that letting these men stay, letting this particular man stay, might challenge more than just her belief in self-reliance. You can have the bunkhouse, we will try it for 2 weeks and then reassess. The next morning found Pearl up before dawn as usual, but the sounds around the ranch were different. Male voices carried from the bunkhouse, followed by the rhythmic splitting of wood. When she stepped onto the porch with her coffee, she was surprised to see a neat stack of firewood already piled beside the house, with Wyatt Sutton adding more logs to it. He looked up at her approach, touching the brim of his hat. Morning, Miss Anderson, hope we didn't wake you. I have been awake since 4, she replied, then added awkwardly, thank you for the firewood. Just earning our keep. He set down his axe and gestured toward the bunkhouse. The men are ready for assignments whenever you are. I took the liberty of checking your north fence line at first light. There's a section that's been cut, probably how the Wilson boys got to your cattle yesterday. We can start repairs there. Pearl was both impressed and slightly unnerved by his initiative. That would be sensible, she agreed. Thomas can show you our supplies. Over the next few days, a new rhythm established itself at Aspen Creek. Wyatt's crew proved to be exactly what he had promised, hardworking, respectful, and skilled. They repaired fences, mended the roof of the barn which had been leaking for months, and established a rotation for night watches that allowed everyone more rest than they had gotten in weeks. Pearl found herself with time to properly care for her father, whose spirits improved noticeably when he was able to sit on the porch and observe the renewed activity around his ranch. The old man took a particular liking to Wyatt, who made a point of stopping by to give reports and ask advice, treating Jeremiah Anderson with the respect due to a rancher temporarily sidelined, not an invalid. That boy knows cattle, her father commented after Wyatt had detailed a plan for rotating the herds to better pastures before winter set in. And he knows people too. His men follow him because they trust him, not because they fear him. He seems competent, Pearl conceded, unwilling to admit how much she had come to depend on Wyatt's steady presence in just a week. Her father gave her a knowing look. He's more than competent, daughter. Men like that are rare on the frontier. Most who come west are running from something or hungry for something. That young man seems at peace with himself. Pearl changed the subject, uncomfortable with her father's assessment. Yet she couldn't deny that Wyatt Sutton had begun to occupy her thoughts in moments when her guard was down. She would find herself watching him as he worked, noting the easy way he laughed with his men or the gentle handling of even the most difficult horses. It was dangerous thinking. Attachment on the frontier only led to pain when the inevitable partings came through death, disaster, or the simple reality that most men eventually moved on. The 2-week trial period passed, and Pearl hired Wyatt and his men on through the winter without discussion, as if both parties simply assumed the arrangement would continue. The Wilson outfit maintained a threatening presence, occasionally showing up at the property line or sending men to town to spread rumors about the Andersons' financial troubles, but they made no further attempts on the cattle or land. They're waiting for something, Wyatt observed one evening as he and Pearl checked the western fence line together, a task that had somehow become their routine. Men like Wilson are patient when they need to be. Perhaps they are waiting for winter, Pearl suggested. Many smaller ranches do not survive the hard months. Wyatt guided his horse around a rocky outcropping, waiting for Pearl to navigate the same obstacle before responding. Aspen Creek will survive this winter. The simple confidence in his statement warmed something inside Pearl that had been cold for a long time. You sound very certain, Mr. Sutton. Wyatt, he corrected gently. After 6 weeks of working together, I think we can dispense with formalities when it's just us. Pearl hesitated, then nodded. Wyatt, she said, the name feeling strangely intimate on her lips. And yes, I believe we will survive the winter, thanks in large part to you and your men. You would have found a way, he said, surprising her. From what I've seen, Pearl Anderson does not give up easily. Pearl felt a blush rise to her cheeks and was grateful for the fading light that hid it. Stubbornness is a family trait. Wyatt laughed, the sound rich and genuine. I would call it determination, not stubbornness. There's a difference. As they crested a hill overlooking the ranch, both fell silent. Below them, lamplight glowed warm from the windows of the main house and bunkhouse, smoke curled from chimneys, and the shapes of cattle could be seen settled for the night in the nearest pasture. It was a scene of peace and prosperity that had seemed impossible just 2 months earlier. It's a fine ranch, Wyatt said softly. Your parents built something special here. Pearl nodded, her throat suddenly tight with emotion. My mother used to say that a ranch is more than land and cattle, it's a dream made visible. She rarely spoke of her mother, finding the memories too painful, but somehow sharing this with Wyatt felt right. She sounds like a wise woman. She was, Pearl agreed, but the frontier took her anyway, influenza 5 winters ago. Wyatt was quiet for a moment before responding. I lost my parents too. Father to a mining accident when I was 16, mother the year after from heartbreak as much as illness. The shared understanding of loss created a connection between them that Pearl found both comforting and frightening. It was easier to keep people at arm's length when you didn't recognize yourself in their pain. Is that why you came west? She asked. Partly, he admitted. Nothing left for me in Pennsylvania after they were gone. My father had always talked about seeing the frontier, so I came in his stead, found I had a knack for horses and cattle work. Pearl could imagine a younger Wyatt, grieving and alone, making his way west with nothing but determination and his father's unfulfilled dream. It made his accomplishments all the more impressive. And you, he asked, have you ever thought of leaving Aspen Creek? The question startled her. This is my home, she said simply. Where else would I go? Nowhere if you do not wish to, Wyatt replied. But sometimes I wonder if you stay because you want to or because you believe you must. His insight was uncomfortably accurate, piercing through defenses Pearl had maintained for years. No one had ever questioned her dedication to the ranch, assuming it was a natural extension of her love for her family and the land. It can be both, she said finally. Duty and desire are not always separate things. Wyatt nodded, accepting her answer without pressing further. We should head back before dark, he said, turning his horse. Storm brewing to the north. As they rode back to the ranch, Pearl found herself examining her life with new eyes. Had she chosen this path or merely accepted it? And if she had the freedom to choose now, what would she want? The questions unsettled her, particularly because she suspected the answers might involve the man riding beside her, a man who had no permanent ties to Aspen Creek beyond a seasonal work contract. The first heavy snows came in early December, blanketing the valley and transforming Aspen Creek into a winter wonderland. The ranch settled into the quiet rhythms of the cold season, feeding cattle, maintaining equipment, and long evenings gathered around fires swapping stories. Pearl's father continued to improve, now able to move about with crutches, his expertise and guidance once again becoming central to ranch operations. With the immediate pressures of survival eased, Pearl found herself with moments to simply be a young woman of 22, rather than the embattled defender of a struggling ranch. It was during this time that she began to notice the subtle changes in her interactions with Wyatt. Their evening conversations on the porch stretched longer, their shared glances held deeper meaning, and the accidental brushing of hands when passing tools or dishes sent currents of awareness through her that both thrilled and terrified her. Christmas approached, bringing with it a festive atmosphere despite the isolation. Pearl's father insisted on hosting a proper celebration for everyone at the ranch, a tradition her mother had always maintained. We will need a tree, her father declared, and greenery for the mantle. Your mother would never let a Christmas pass without making the house beautiful, no matter how lean the times. Pearl nodded, memories of happier Christmases bringing both joy and melancholy. I will see what I can gather tomorrow. Take Wyatt with you, her father suggested, his tone deliberately casual. He knows the forest to the east better than most now with all his hunting trips. Pearl started to object but stopped herself. There was no logical reason to refuse the help, and her father would see through any excuse. The next morning found Pearl and Wyatt riding into the pine forest that bordered the eastern edge of Aspen Creek land. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, making the forest a pristine wonderland of white branches and silent beauty. "Your father seems excited about Christmas," Wyatt commented as they made their way along a narrow trail. "My mother loved the holiday," Pearl explained. "She brought traditions from her home in Vermont, candles in the windows, greenery throughout the house, small gifts even in the hardest years. After she died, we observed Christmas but without the joy. This is the first year my father has wanted to truly celebrate again." Wyatt nodded in understanding. Grief has its own timeline. Maybe he's finally ready to honor her memory by bringing back the traditions she loved, rather than avoiding them because they hurt too much. The insight struck Pearl deeply. "I had not thought of it that way," she admitted. "I always saw the traditions as reminders of what we had lost." "Maybe they can also be reminders of what endures," Wyatt suggested gently. "Love leaves traces that even death cannot erase." They rode in contemplative silence until they reached a clearing where several perfect young pines grew. As they dismounted to examine the trees, Pearl found herself seeing Wyatt with new clarity. Here was a man who understood loss but had not been hardened by it, who had built a life of purpose and connection despite the harshness of the frontier. "This one," she said, pointing to a symmetrical pine about 7 feet tall. "My mother would have chosen this one." Wyatt studied the tree and nodded. Good choice, not too big to fit through the door but grand enough for a proper celebration. As he set to work cutting down the tree, Pearl gathered pine boughs and holly for decorating the house. The simple domestic task, performed in the peaceful forest with Wyatt's reassuring presence nearby, awakened feelings she had long suppressed, desires for a normal life, for companionship, for a future that included more than just survival. They were loading the tree onto Wyatt's horse when the crack of a rifle shot shattered the silence. The bullet splintered a tree trunk inches from Pearl's head. Wyatt reacted instantly, pulling Pearl behind the solid bulk of his horse and drawing his revolver in one fluid motion. "Are you hit?" he asked urgently, his eyes scanning the forest while he kept his body between her and the direction of the shot. "No," Pearl replied, her heart pounding. She reached for her own rifle, secured in its scabbard on her saddle. Another shot rang out, this one striking the ground near their feet. Wyatt's expression hardened as he identified the shooter's position. "Two men on the ridge to the northeast," he said quietly. "They're too far for accurate pistol fire, but I can keep them pinned while you make a run for those rocks." Pearl shook her head firmly. "I am not leaving you exposed." She raised her rifle and fired toward the ridge, not aiming to hit but to force the shooters to take cover. Wyatt gave her an approving nod, then fired his own weapon toward a different position, having spotted movement. "We need to move. On three, we both head for those boulders. Ready." Pearl nodded, and at Wyatt's count, they both dashed for the cover of a large rock formation 20 yards away. They made it safely, but their horses, spooked by the gunfire, had bolted toward home. "Wilson's men?" Pearl asked as they crouched behind the rocks. "Most likely," Wyatt confirmed grimly. "Though shooting from ambush is low, even for them." He peered cautiously around the edge of their shelter. "I see them moving. They're trying to circle around us." Pearl checked her ammunition. "I have 12 shots left." "You?" "5 in the pistol, another 12 in my belt." Wyatt's expression was determined but concerned. "We're 3 miles from the ranch. Even if the horses make it back, it will be hours before anyone comes looking." "We cannot stay here," Pearl concluded. "They will have us pinned by nightfall and in this cold." She didn't need to finish the thought. December nights in Montana could be deadly for those caught unprepared. Wyatt studied their surroundings with a tactician's eye. "There's a game trail that leads down to the creek bed about 50 yards south of here. If we can reach it, we can follow it back toward the ranch. The embankment will provide cover most of the way." Pearl nodded in agreement. "I will provide covering fire while you make a run for it, then you can cover me." Wyatt looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, respect mingled with something deeper. "Pearl Anderson, you are the bravest woman I have ever known," he said softly. "But we go together. I am not leaving your side." Before she could argue, he continued, "On my signal, we will both fire toward the ridge, then run for the trail together. Stay low and close to me." The plan worked initially. Their coordinated gunfire forced the ambushers to take cover, allowing Pearl and Wyatt to reach the game trail. They moved as quickly as possible along the creek bed, the high banks on either side providing protection. Who do you think they were? Pearl asked breathlessly as they paused to listen for pursuit. Hired guns, Wyatt replied. Wilson's escalating. These weren't ranch hands, they were professionals. The implications were chilling. Hugh Wilson was no longer content with intimidation tactics. He had moved to elimination. They had covered perhaps a mile when disaster struck. As they rounded a bend in the creek, they found themselves face to face with one of their pursuers, a lean, hollow-eyed man with a rifle aimed squarely at them. Well now, the man drawled, saved me the trouble of tracking you through the snow. Wyatt had pushed Pearl slightly behind him, his pistol raised, creating a standoff. Neither man fired, each knowing that at this range, both shots would likely find their marks. Wilson sending gunmen after women now? Wyatt asked, his voice cold with contempt. That's a new low even for him. The gunman shrugged, nothing personal, just business. Wilson wants the Anderson land cleared before spring. No Andersons, no claim. Pearl felt ice form in her veins at the casual way this man discussed murdering her and her father. There are laws in this territory, she said firmly, refusing to show fear. The gunman laughed. Laws are for those who can enforce them, lady. Out here it's still about who has the most men and the most guns. His eyes shifted to Wyatt. You're not an Anderson, you could ride away from this. Wilson's not after you. He is now, Wyatt replied evenly. Something in his tone made the gunman hesitate, studying Wyatt more carefully. Do I know you? I doubt it, Wyatt said, but you might have heard of my uncle. Marshal James Sutton of Wyoming Territory. The gunman's expression changed subtly. Sutton, the one they call Justice Jim. Wyatt nodded once, the same, and he taught me to shoot before I could ride, so here's what's going to happen. You're going to lower your rifle, nice and slow, and then you're going to tell us exactly what Wilson has planned. For a tense moment, Pearl thought the gunman would refuse, would choose to shoot and take his chances. But something in Wyatt's steady gaze, or perhaps the reputation of his uncle, made the man reconsider. Wilson's got papers, he said finally, lowering his rifle slightly. Claims old Anderson signed over mineral rights years ago. With him dead and no witnesses, who's to say different? Pearl gasped, that's a lie, my father would never. Easy, Wyatt cautioned her, never taking his eyes off the gunman. Keep talking. That's all I know, the man insisted. Wilson hired 5 of us to make sure the Andersons had an accident before Christmas. He's got a mining company coming to survey the land right after New Year's. Wyatt's expression hardened. Where are the others? 2 back at the ridge, 1 circling west and Blackett. He's our tracker. He's probably already heading for your ranch, figuring you'd go home. Pearl felt her blood run cold. Her father was at the ranch, virtually defenseless if this Blackett arrived before them. Wyatt seemed to read her thoughts. We need to move, he said quietly. Then to the gunman, your gun belt, remove it slowly. The man complied, unfastening his belt and letting it drop to the snow. Now back up 20 paces and keep walking south, Wyatt ordered. If I see you again anywhere near Aspen Creek land, I won't be this generous. Once the gunman had disappeared around a bend, Wyatt quickly collected the discarded weapons. We need to get to the ranch, he said urgently. If what he said is true, your father is in danger. They moved as quickly as the snowy conditions allowed, taking a more direct route now that they knew where their pursuers were. Pearl's mind raced with the implications of what they had learned. Hugh Wilson was not just trying to force them to sell, he was planning to steal their land through forgery and murder. My father would never have signed over mineral rights, she said as they hurried through the forest. He always said what was under the land was as much our heritage as what was above it. Wilson's counting on having no one left to dispute the claim, Wyatt replied grimly. But we have an advantage now, we know his plan. They emerged from the forest to see Aspen Creek Ranch in the distance, the buildings peaceful under their blanket of snow. Nothing appeared amiss, which Pearl took as a hopeful sign. We should approach carefully, Wyatt cautioned. If this Blackett reached the ranch before us, he could be watching. They circled wide, approaching the ranch from the west, where a stand of cottonwoods provided cover almost to the barn. As they neared the buildings, they spotted tracks in the snow, a single horse recently arrived. He's here, Wyatt whispered. Stay close. They moved silently to the barn, slipping inside through the side door. The interior was dim and quiet, the horses in their stalls undisturbed. Pearl felt a momentary relief. If there had been violence, the animals would be agitated. I need to get to the house, she whispered. My father. We go together, Wyatt insisted, but first we need to know where Blackett is. As if in answer, they heard the main house door open and close, followed by footsteps on the porch. Peering carefully through a barn window, they saw a burly man in a sheepskin coat standing on the porch, scanning the property with a rifle cradled in his arms. He's looking for us, Wyatt murmured, which means your father is still alive. Blackett wants to make sure he gets us all at once. Pearl felt a surge of determination. Then we need to surprise him first. They formulated a quick plan. Pearl would create a distraction from the back of the barn, while Wyatt circled around to approach the house from the blind side. It was risky, but with Blackett actively hunting them and her father trapped in the house, they had few options. Be careful, Wyatt said as they prepared to separate. His hand caught hers, squeezing briefly. I have too many things I still need to tell you. The simple statement, laden with unspoken emotion, caught Pearl off guard. You will have the chance, she promised, returning the pressure of his fingers before slipping away. The plan worked better than they could have hoped. Pearl's distraction, releasing one of the horses from the corral with a slap on its flank, drew Blackett's attention long enough for Wyatt to position himself with a clear advantage. When the gunman moved to investigate the commotion, Wyatt stepped onto the porch behind him, his revolver pressed firmly against Blackett's spine. Drop the rifle, he ordered. Very slowly. Inside the house, they found Pearl's father seated calmly at the kitchen table, his crutches nearby and a shotgun across his lap. Took you both long enough, he remarked dryly. This fellow's been watching the house for the past hour. Thought he was being clever about it, but I've been watching men try to sneak up on this ranch for 30 years. Pearl embraced her father in relief. Are you all right? Right as rain, he assured her. Though our Christmas tree expedition seems to have gotten complicated. With Blackett secured in the storage cellar under guard by two of Wyatt's men, they gathered around the kitchen table to discuss their situation. The other ranch hands had been alerted and were now patrolling the property, watching for the return of the remaining gunmen. Wilson has gone too far this time, Pearl's father said firmly. Forging documents is a hanging offense in this territory. But without proof, it's his word against ours, Pearl pointed out, and with his influence in the county. Wyatt had been unusually quiet, his expression thoughtful. We need to force his hand, he said finally. Make him reveal his plan in front of witnesses. How do we do that? Pearl asked. We let him think he's won, Wyatt proposed. The gunmen haven't returned, so Wilson doesn't know yet that his plan has failed. What if we send word into town that there's been an accident at Aspen Creek, that both of you were killed when your wagon went over the ridge on the north property? Pearl's father leaned forward, intrigued. And then what? Then we watch and wait, Wyatt continued. Wilson will move quickly to file his forged documents before anyone else can claim the land, but he'll have to do it publicly at the county office. Where we can challenge him with witnesses present, Pearl finished, seeing the strategy. Including the sheriff. Wyatt nodded. Exactly, and I've been thinking about those mineral rights. If Wilson is bringing in a mining company, he must know something about the land that you don't. Pearl exchanged glances with her father. The northern ridge, she said slowly. Mother always said there was something special about that part of the property. The soil is different there. Copper, her father confirmed. We found traces years ago but never pursued it. Your mother believed the land was more valuable as a working ranch than torn up for mining. Wilson must have discovered the copper deposits somehow, Wyatt concluded. That's why he's so determined to get this land specifically. The plan they developed was daring but sound. Thomas rode into town the next day, spreading the tragic news that Jeremiah and Pearl Anderson had both perished when their wagon slid off the icy North Ridge Road. The bodies, he reported solemnly at the saloon, were too mangled to bring to town and had been buried on the property. Meanwhile, Pearl and her father remained hidden in the ranch house, while Wyatt and his men maintained vigilant watch for any sign of Wilson or his remaining gunmen. Blackett, faced with the prospect of hanging for attempted murder, had proven surprisingly talkative, confirming everything they had suspected about Wilson's plans. Wilson's been planning this for months, he revealed. Has a mining company from Denver ready to start operations as soon as he secures the land. They tested samples from the North Ridge and said it's one of the richest copper deposits in the territory. 3 days after spreading the news of the accident, Thomas returned from town with the information they had been waiting for. Wilson was at the county office this morning, he reported. Filed papers claiming mineral rights to all of Aspen Creek land. He's meeting with the mining company representatives at the Grand Hotel tomorrow at noon to finalize arrangements. Wyatt looked at Pearl and her father. Tomorrow, then, we confront him with the sheriff present, catch him in the act of fraud. Pearl nodded, her expression determined. Tomorrow we end this once and for all. That evening, as final preparations were made for the next day's confrontation, Pearl found a moment alone with Wyatt on the porch. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant in the black sky above. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything you've done for Aspen Creek, for my father, for me." Wyatt turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "I didn't do it out of obligation, Pearl." "I know," she acknowledged, "and that's what scares me." His brow furrowed. "Scares you? Why?" Pearl struggled to articulate the fear that had been growing alongside her feelings for him. "Because when this is over, when Wilson is dealt with and spring comes, you will leave. That is the way of the frontier. People move on." Wyatt was silent for a long moment, his gaze steady on her face. "Is that what you believe, that I would just move on when the season changes?" "Isn't that what men do?" Pearl asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The frontier is no place for permanence. My mother taught me that when she died and left us all shattered, better not to form attachments that will only end in loss." Understanding dawned in Wyatt's eyes. "So that's the wall you've built around your heart, not just from me but from everyone." Pearl nodded, unable to deny the truth he had so clearly seen. "It is safer that way." Wyatt stepped closer, close enough that Pearl could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cold night air. "Safer maybe, but is it living? Is that what your mother would have wanted for you, to close yourself off from the possibility of love because you might lose it someday?" The question struck Pearl like a physical blow. She had never considered that her self-imposed isolation might be a betrayal of her mother's legacy rather than a tribute to it. "I do not know how to be any other way," she admitted. "The frontier demands strength, self-reliance." "Yes," Wyatt agreed, "but it also rewards those who build connections, communities. No one survives out here truly alone, Pearl. Your parents understood that. They built this ranch with the help of loyal hands, neighbors, friends." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she chose, and took her hand in his. "The frontier takes much from us, that's true. But it also gives. It gives us the freedom to create new families, forge new bonds, build something lasting in a harsh land." Pearl looked down at their joined hands, feeling the calluses on his palm that matched her own, marks of hard work, of commitment to a life that demanded everything and promised nothing. "What are you saying, Wyatt?" His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "I'm saying that when spring comes, I don't plan to move on unless you ask me to. I'm saying that I came west looking for a place to belong, and I found it here at Aspen Creek." He paused, gathering courage. "With you." The confession hung in the cold air between them, honest and vulnerable. Pearl felt the walls around her heart tremble, foundations weakened by this man's quiet strength and unwavering presence. "How can you be so certain?" she asked. "We have known each other only months." Wyatt smiled gently. "Some things you just know, Pearl Anderson. I knew it that first day, watching you stand on this porch with your rifle, ready to defend your home against any threat. I knew it even more when I saw how you care for your father, how you work alongside your hands without complaint, how you never surrender no matter how difficult things become." He took a deep breath before continuing. "I love you, Pearl. I think I have since that first day, and every day since has only confirmed what my heart already knew." The declaration, simple and direct, pierced through the last of Pearl's defenses. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness but of recognition, of finding something she had not known she was seeking. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I know," he acknowledged. "Loving someone is the bravest thing anyone can do, especially here on the frontier. But if there's one thing I know about Pearl Anderson, it's that she doesn't back down from a challenge just because it's difficult." A smile tugged at Pearl's lips despite her tears. "You make a compelling argument, Mr. Sutton." "I hope so," he replied, his own smile spreading, "because I plan to spend the rest of my life making that same argument if you'll let me." In the silence that followed, Pearl made a choice, not just about Wyatt, but about how she would live the rest of her life. Would she continue to wall herself off from connection, from joy, from the possibility of both great happiness and great loss? Or would she embrace the fullness of life with all its uncertainties? She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and placed her free hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "I think," she said softly, "that I would like to hear that argument for a very long time." Wyatt's joy illuminated his face as he gently drew her closer. Their first kiss was tender, a promise exchanged without words beneath the vast Montana sky. When they finally parted, Pearl felt as though something fundamental had shifted inside her, a opening where before there had been only careful restraint. "Tomorrow we face Wilson," she said, resting her head against Wyatt's shoulder, "and after that—" "After that," Wyatt finished, "we build something lasting together, if that's what you want." Pearl nodded, certainty replacing fear. "It is what I want. What I need, though I did not know it until you came riding up to Aspen Creek." The confrontation the next day unfolded almost exactly as they had planned. Wilson, caught in the act of presenting forged documents to mining executives with the sheriff as witness, found himself facing charges of fraud, attempted murder, and conspiracy. His protests that the Andersons were dead were dramatically refuted when Pearl and her father walked into the Grand Hotel dining room, very much alive, and prepared with their own documentation proving their ownership of the land and all rights to it. The expressions on the faces of Wilson and his cronies as they realized their scheme had failed completely would be a memory Pearl would treasure for years to come. By Christmas Eve, the threat of Hugh Wilson had been neutralized. He sat in the county jail awaiting trial, his hired gunmen scattered to the winds or in custody. Aspen Creek Ranch was secure, its future brighter than ever with the knowledge of the copper deposits that could be developed responsibly on the Andersons' terms and timeline. The ranch house glowed with warmth and light as Pearl put the finishing touches on the Christmas decorations. The tree she and Wyatt had eventually recovered from the forest stood in the corner of the main room, adorned with candles and the ornaments her mother had carefully preserved over the years. Her father sat in his favorite chair, looking healthier and happier than he had in years, engaged in animated conversation with Thomas and several of the hands who had been invited to join the celebration. The smell of roasting meat and fresh bread filled the air, promising a feast worthy of the occasion. Pearl felt Wyatt's approach before she saw him, a newfound awareness that both delighted and amazed her. She turned to find him watching her with a warmth that made her heart beat faster. "Your mother would be proud," he said softly, gesturing to the festive scene. "You've brought back everything she loved about Christmas." Pearl nodded, allowing herself to feel the bittersweet joy of honoring her mother's memory. "I think she would have liked you very much, Wyatt Sutton." "I hope so," he replied, "because I have something to ask you and I'd like to think she would approve." Before Pearl could respond, Wyatt took her hand and led her to the center of the room. Conversation gradually quieted as everyone noticed the serious expression on his face. "Mr. Anderson," Wyatt addressed Pearl's father formally. "I know this may seem sudden to some, but not to those who understand how clearly the heart can recognize what it needs." He turned to Pearl, taking both her hands in his. "From the moment I rode onto Aspen Creek land, I knew I had found something rare and precious. Not just a beautiful piece of Montana, but a woman whose courage, determination, and heart have captured mine completely." Pearl felt the room fade away until there was only Wyatt, his blue eyes filled with a love she had never dared to hope for. "Pearl Anderson," he continued, dropping to one knee before her, "the frontier has taught us both that life is uncertain, that tomorrow is never guaranteed, which is why I don't want to waste another day without asking you to share your life with mine." From his pocket, he produced a simple gold ring with a small, perfect diamond that caught the candlelight. "Will you marry me and make Aspen Creek our home, not just for a season but for all the seasons of our lives?" The room held its collective breath as Pearl looked down at the man kneeling before her. The man who had helped save her ranch, who had shown her that strength didn't mean isolation, who had taught her that loving deeply was not a weakness but the greatest courage. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, Wyatt Sutton, I will marry you." The room erupted in cheers and congratulations as Wyatt slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to embrace her. Over his shoulder, Pearl caught her father's eye, saw the tears of joy streaming down his weathered face, and knew that this was exactly what her mother would have wanted for her. Not just survival on the frontier, but a full life rich with love and connection. As the Christmas celebration continued around them, Pearl and Wyatt stood by the window, watching as fresh snow began to fall, blanketing Aspen Creek Ranch in pristine white. A clean slate, a new beginning. "Do you remember what I said about the frontier?" Wyatt asked, his arm around her waist. Pearl nodded. "That it takes much but also gives." Tonight, he said, kissing her temple gently, I think we can agree that what it gives is far greater than what it takes, if we have the courage to accept the gift. Standing in the warm glow of the Christmas lights, surrounded by friends who had become family, Pearl Anderson knew that she had finally found the truth that had eluded her for so long. The frontier was indeed harsh and unforgiving, but it was also a place where love could take root and flourish, where a brave cowboy and a determined cowgirl could build something lasting together, a home, a family, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And in that moment, Pearl's heart was at peace, her dilemma resolved by the simple, profound truth that loving deeply was not a risk to be avoided but the greatest adventure of all.